You can support me by turning on notifications, subscribing to my channel, and liking the video. Waiting for your comments. The scream from the heart of the forest, the howl of the wind, turned into a haunting symphony as the sun set behind the hills. Night crept in like a cold, dark shroud, and I stood at the edge of that forest where my journey would begin. Beneath a merciless gray sky, the branches of the trees looked like skeletal hands, looming threateningly as if warning any unwelcome visitor. Keep away! When I first decided to pursue the legend I'd been chasing for so long, I never imagined I'd feel this uneasy. I'd heard all sorts of stories about a terrifying scream said to come from deep within the forest. Whispers of a dreadful sound passed from ear to ear. According to one rumor, those who heard it lost their minds within a few days. Another claimed horrifying creatures roamed the woods. But as a journalist, I wanted to uncover the truth and share what I found with the world. I left my car on the dirt road because the path ahead wasn't wide enough to continue driving. Taking my flashlight, backpack, and camera, I started walking. It was late autumn, and most of the leaves had fallen. Every step I took crunched through dry branches and leaves underfoot. My ears were on high alert. Each faint rustle made me freeze in place, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried to steady myself by repeating silently, "This is just an ordinary forest." Yet I couldn't shake the chill stirring inside me. After a while, I was almost swallowed by the dark. The air grew noticeably colder, my breath forming mist in front of me before fading away. The trees seemed to huddle closer together. In this part of the forest, the path was nearly indiscernible. From time to time, I saw small marker stones or arrow symbols carved into tree trunks, presumably left by previous travelers. One question rose in my mind. Did those who traveled this way before me ever make it back? That thought only heightened my anxiety, which was already fraying my nerves. After about an hour of walking, I came upon a wide clearing. It was an inexplicable gap in the heart of the forest. Maybe a severe storm had once toppled trees here, or perhaps it was the work of humans. In the center stood a small cabin, weathered by time yet still upright, seemingly abandoned for years. Its door was ajar and a menacing darkness lay inside. As unsettling as it felt, I decided to approach the cabin. It might serve as shelter or reveal a clue. Carefully pushing the door open, I heard it creak, echoing through the silence. The smell of rotting wood, an overwhelming dampness hit me. When I shone my weak flashlight inside, I saw a dusty table, broken chairs tossed aside and scattered, mostly torn pieces of paper on the floor. Rough shelves fixed haphazardly to the walls housed old newspaper clippings instead of tableware. Stepping in gradually, I examined every detail. The newspaper scraps bore dates from decades ago. Some reported murders, others recounted missing persons. Many were related to disappearances in this very forest. A shiver ran through me. I picked up one random clipping. The headline read, "Further reports of people missing along the forest road." The date was from nearly 25 years earlier. Just then, I felt compelled to look out the cabin window. In the darkness of the forest, I sensed sudden movement, shifting shadows, or maybe something real. Squinting, I tried to focus, but I couldn't see anything. A gust of wind swept through, reminding me again of the night's bone-chilling breath. I felt trapped, alone with my growing fear. Looking at these ripped newspapers was getting to me, and I didn't want to stay any longer. I needed to go deeper, to find the source of that scream. Lingering in the cabin any further would only magnify my fear. Re-entering the forest, the moon appeared faintly above me. Its light struggled to filter through the dense canopy where branches overlapped. Before long, an unsettling sense of anxiety began to tighten in my chest, as though an unrelenting wave of dread hovered over me in the darkness, signaling an inevitable disaster. Sometimes, I switched off my flashlight to listen more intently. Its beam strained my eyes adjusted to the dark and made me an obvious target. In the silence of the forest, I started hearing distant, indistinct sounds. Sometimes they resembled a roar, other times whispers like an anguished moan. I had no clue what they might be. At one point, the crunching sounds came quite close, as if someone or something moved among the trees. Or animals, perhaps. But it was unlike any ordinary forest noises. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe, yet my curiosity still outweighed my fear. I had to find the source of that sound, to uncover the truth behind the legend passed on by word of mouth. Maybe this would be my final story, but my desire to reveal it to the world was the only thing keeping my terror at bay. Continuing on, I soon came upon the trunk of a colossal tree. Its trunk was extraordinarily thick, and its branches looked as if they had been struck by lightning. The soil around it was darkened, seemingly burned or rotted. On the bark, I noticed deep scratches that resembled massive claw marks, or even fingernail tracks of some sort. Certainly, it could have been an animal, but what creature could leave such deep grooves? My hair stood on end. Moving beyond the huge trunk, I noticed a faint light gleam ahead. Perhaps another clearing. My heart pounded like it was ready to burst as I headed in that direction. I emerged from the thick trees into an open space, where a lake greeted me. The moon's reflection shimmered on the surface, giving it a serene appearance from the shoreline. But the cold night wind and those eerie forest noises transformed this beauty into something that felt like a toxic fairy tale. I decided to circle the lake. Sometimes, you can find abandoned gear or remains from campers by the water's edge. Perhaps I'd stumble upon a clue to the victims of the scream mentioned in so many stories. As I approached the lake, I found an old tent sprawled on the ground nearby. Its covering was torn, and its stakes had been ripped out. It looked like it had either endured a fierce storm or suffered an attack by a large animal. Scattered around the tent were a few items: a tattered backpack, a rusted knife, a corroded gas lantern. Most notably, there was a notebook on the ground, with various names scrawled across the cover. I picked it up and skimmed the pages. It belonged to a young couple who had been camping. Their last entry was dated about 10 years ago. It read, "Tonight we heard a terrible scream from deep in the forest." It didn't sound human, yet there was a very human agony in that cry. "We're frightened. We won't last here till morning." The following pages were blank. On the edge of the last page were dried red stains that looked like blood. The sight of it drove my fear to an indescribable peak. Right then, I heard that ominous sound for myself, deep, ear-piercing, indescribable, as if it tore through the sky, instilling terror in every living creature in the forest. The moment I heard it, the notebook slipped from my hands, and I thought my heart would explode. It seemed to come from the other side of the lake. It was neither animal nor human. Perhaps something cursed that defied description. I tried to control my breathing and took out my camera. I wanted to capture the sound, or at least document its source. My hands trembled as I turned on the camera, and the scream abruptly stopped, replaced once more by a deadly silence. I was torn between staying and running. My instincts yelled, "Flee, hide," while my journalistic curiosity whispered, "You need to find out more." In the end, curiosity won. Skirting around the lake, I headed toward where the scream had come from. Each step sank my boots deeper into the mud, as though I were stuck in an icy swamp. Inch by inch, I pressed on into the woods. It was dark and menacing. Shadows danced in the weak beam of my flashlight, and these shifting shapes took on demonic outlines. Maybe fear had already taken over my imagination. As I walked, I expected the scream to ring out again. Instead, it was replaced by strange whispers. It felt as though the trees themselves were talking in a language I couldn't decipher. Sometimes the murmur seemed like words. Other times, it was just indistinct noise. A haunting doubt gnawed at my mind. Am I witnessing something that shouldn't exist in the rational world? Suddenly, I tripped on a branch and nearly fell face first. My heart pounded wildly. As I steadied my flashlight, I saw a dark shape on the ground. Instinctively, I recoiled. It took me a few seconds to realize it was a rotting corpse of a deer, its antlers broken, eyes gone, and body covered with unidentifiable wounds. The savagery of the forest could explain a scene like this, but the queasy feeling in my stomach suggested something far more sinister was at play. Scanning the area, I spotted something slowly moving in the darkness, suggesting I wasn't alone. My heart leapt into my throat again. Squinting, I tried to see more clearly, but the shape vanished within seconds. Fear, exhaustion, and adrenaline all rushed through me. That shadow might have been the source of the scream, or somehow connected to it. Struggling to retain my composure, I reminded myself, you came here for the truth, just one more step. Mustering my courage, I moved on. The forest formed a gloomy corridor with interlaced branches overhead. Suddenly, the scream pierced the silence again, closer, sharper, and more terrifying this time. My skin prickled. I raised my camera once more, but the footage shook wildly as my trembling hands blurred everything. Then, for a fraction of a second, in the beam of my flashlight, I glimpsed a figure standing among the trees. It had a tall, shadowy body, with large eyes, or perhaps two glowing lights for eyes, but then it vanished. It was as if it had merged back into the trunks. The terror ran so deep I could hardly trust my own eyes, yet I couldn't find my way back. The scream echoed once more, right behind me now. Whirling around, I saw nothing but darkness, my blood turning to ice as my legs shook. That was more than I could bear. I dashed through the dark forest, blindly trying to escape. My only thought was, I have to get out of here. Another branch tangled around my foot. I could feel the screams drawing closer with every second, and I stumbled toward the first open space I could see. Finally, I reached a clearing where the trees were less dense. The sky was slightly more visible, and the wind howled with violent force. My heart thudded in my chest. And then I spotted the dying embers of a campfire at the edge of the clearing. Someone had been here, and recently, yet there was no one around the fire. I could see a few scattered mats and sleeping bags left behind. Help! I shouted. No response. It was as if the camp had been abandoned in a hurry. I had no choice but to approach. For days, I'd been pursuing a mystery that was now pushing me toward madness. I searched around the campfire, hoping to find notes or belongings someone left behind. There was a plastic box, a half-full water bottle, and some scrawled pages from a notebook. Opening them, I realized it was a journal. From what I could understand, for people had come here together. The last entry read, "We heard it again tonight. That dreadful scream. It defies words. One of us has gone missing. We split up to look for them, but no one has returned. It feels like the forest is filled with unknown forces. We have no way out." The writing stopped there. I suddenly realized tears were rolling down my cheeks. Had these people come here seeking the same truth as I was, or was it just a misfortune of choosing to camp here? Either way, they had been swallowed by the same darkness. I turned around and saw the fog gathering deeper within the woods. It curled around the tree trunks, like the arms of a gigantic creature stretching in every direction. Everything was silent, yet it pulsed with a strange energy. Then that scream tore through the air again, now so close it felt as if it was reverberating inside my head. I lifted my camera, hit record. Fog, screams, darkness, all merged into a force that threatened my sanity, leaving my knees weak. This time, I couldn't run. I stood rooted to the spot, trembling as I looked around. After a moment, the scream subsided, replaced by a low, guttural moan. I felt sure my heart would stop. Suddenly, a silhouette emerged in the fog. It was the same tall, shadowy shape, vaguely human but well over 2 meters tall, with bony, elongated arms. There seemed to be horn-like protrusions, or maybe feathered ridges on its head. But there were no eyes, or if there were, I couldn't see them through the darkness. It stood there, an expressionless phantom. I could practically feel the horrifying scream emanating from its gaping mouth. Maybe this was a cursed spirit, buried deep in the forest. Time froze as I stared, unsure whether it lasted seconds or minutes. Then it took a single step toward me. My heart felt as if it would burst from my chest. I closed my eyes, convinced I was done for. But suddenly, everything fell silent. When I opened my eyes, the silhouette was gone, and the fog began to recede. The quiet was deafening. At the horizon, the first light of dawn shimmered. I could hardly believe I was still alive. My heart still thundered, my body trembling with fear. My feet began stepping backward, and I frantically searched for the way out. Perhaps the forest's curse withdrew with the coming day, giving me a chance to escape. I sprinted between the trees, stumbling again and again. My legs felt on the verge of giving out, yet I refused to stop. I couldn't bear to hear that scream, or see that thing once more. At last, I reached the same path where I had first stepped into the woods at dusk. By the time I found my car, the sun was rising over the horizon. Relief washed over me, though panic still gripped my chest. I took out my camera and reviewed the footage. The screen was mostly dark, just a blur of trees swaying, my ragged breathing and a distant muffled howl resembling that awful scream. There was no clear image. That shape in the fog was nowhere to be found. Part of me felt disappointed, but another part was relieved. Maybe no one would believe me, yet I knew the truth. That scream, whatever lived deep in that forest, was still there. I started my car as soon as I sat down and sped away. On the drive back, a single question crossed my mind. What would I say to the families of those who disappeared there? Perhaps I had uncovered one of history's greatest mysteries, yet I couldn't grasp it fully. The ominous entity in the forest seemed to feed on people's fears. Was there a scientific explanation, or was it merely a dark curse perpetuated over centuries? I didn't know. All I knew was that the scream from the heart of the forest made me experience indescribable terror. Days, weeks passed. At night, I dream of that dark silhouette in the mist, taking a step toward me, letting out shrieking cries, until I abruptly wake. In the morning, drenched in sweat, I replay the footage on my camera again and again. Darkness, jittery light, and that dreadful echo. I want to share my experience, to warn people. Yet I keep asking myself, what if that sound calls me back one day? I don't know the answer, and that uncertainty keeps a fresh fear alive inside me. Because once you taste such horror, you never truly rid yourself of it. Perhaps that scream in the depths of the forest will go on echoing forever. And maybe someday someone else, driven by curiosity, will walk that dark path again. When I think about that, I feel the same dread, regret, and fear I imagine earlier storytellers must have felt. Because the truth is that some secrets should never be fully revealed. Some screams erupt from the deepest places and settle into the darkest corners of your soul. No matter how much you try, there remains a part you can never fully illuminate. For the forest, ancient and merciless, knows all too well how to guard its horrors.